Hi, my name is Heriberto Ayala Jr. Everybody knows me as Tito.
And my name is Craig Merck, and we're here today at the California, Nevada JATC training facility. And in this video, we're going to talk about gear inspection. We're going to start today by talking about one of the most basic pieces of equipment common to all tree climbers, which is our climbing saddle. Saddles come in many different styles and from many different manufacturers, but they all share some of the same attributes. It's important that whatever saddle you have, you should always read the manufacturer's instructions. Those have information about longevity, inspection, and tolerances of the piece of equipment. All climbing saddles, whether an older traditional style or a more modern style, are going to have some of the same design features. A waist belt and leg loops, and then some will have a bridge out in front. They are all going to have D-rings for attaching life support and work positioning equipment, and then separate tool attachments as well. When we inspect our saddle, a good place to start is right at the buckle. There's several different kinds of buckles, but you want to make sure that all of the components are intact and that they operate correctly and that it doesn't release inadvertently. You also want to check to see if this has any stitching or bar tacks, that the stitching and bar tacks are all in good condition. There may be bar tacks that go around the back side of the saddle. These all need to be inspected as well. As long as you're on the waist belt portion, it's a good time to inspect the D-rings or work positioning rings. They should be free of cracks, serious gouges, and they shouldn't be distorted or bent in any way. On the bridge, it's important that we inspect our bridges every single time that we climb. There have been many injuries and fatalities due to bridge failure, and it's one of the most critical parts of the saddle. If this fails, it's likely you'll suffer a fall. We also want to inspect the point at which the bridge attaches to the saddle and the way that it attaches to the leg loops as well. That may have stitching or reinforcement or bar tacks or rivets. Those all need to be inspected because your life depends on it. The leg loops may have ability to change size for comfort. If that has stitching or bar tacks or closures, you need to be familiar with how those things work and know what to look for in terms of the wear points. Tito, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so on the bridges, like Craig was talking about, follow the recommendations of the company. Most of the time they'll put like anywhere 3-6 months, because don't forget, it's not like rope, but the other ones, your point of attachment where you're putting that constant pressure on there. So that's why it's very important to do that inspection and follow the recommendations of the manufacturer. If it's every 6 months, hey, just be aware of that, because you're putting all that same pressure on those same points, not like the rope on different points you're putting it on there. So another important thing on this one too is your tags. Make sure those tags are there. So make sure that tag is on there, the ANSI, to let you know the manufacturer, when it was made, and the date. Okay. I think from there, let's jump into what else has to be on that saddle. That's very important. Your handsaw. Everybody knows that it's an ANSI requirement that before you go up and ascend up a tree, you have to have a handsaw in place. So on the handsaw, what you want to do is check your scabbard, make sure there's no ribs, any exposed teeth that could be a hazard to yourself and to be able to cut yourself. Also, what you want to do is you want to make sure your handsaw is in good conditions. You want to check those screws, make sure they're always tightened, make sure no missing teeth. If there's missing teeth, when you're going to cut, it could bounce on you and then become a hazard to your hand and cut yourself, and nobody wants to get cut with the handsaw. So make sure you're doing your inspection on that too.
Tito, if my handsaw has a rubber handle, is it considered an insulated tool?
No, it is not. It is not an insulated tool. So yeah, good point. Okay, so now let's go with the flip line. All right, with your flip line, what you want to do too is you want to check your snaps, making sure they don't just open. Make sure you're double locking. make sure everything's good. Again, check all that. Check your stitching. Make sure your stitchings are good. Make sure it has that ANSI tag on there as well. And then, when you're checking it, run your hands through it. Any bulging, any flat spots, anything like that. Because remember, the heart of the rope that's where the most strength of the rope is. So you want to run your hands through all that. You want to check also your carabiners on here. Make sure they're opening and closing correctly. Your 10% wear. You want to check your rope grab. Make sure it is working correctly. Make sure that those nuts and bolts are nice and fastened and tight. So that's with the flip line. Anything else you would like to add, Craig?
No.
Okay, so with that said, that's how you want to do an inspection on your saddle. So from here, we're going to jump into rope. So, Craig?
Modern climbing lines are an amazing piece of technology. The Z133 has 5 safety features that every climbing line used in line clearance must meet. It must be a minimum of a 1/2 inch in diameter. It must have a tensile breaking strength of 5,400 pounds. It can have no more than 7% elongation over its total length at 10% of 5,400 pounds or 540 pounds. It must be made of synthetic materials, and it must be marketed as arborist climbing line. That comes from the Ocean 1910 269. The Z133 echoes that language, and that's the minimum characteristics that our climb lines have to have. Equipment manufacturers and rope manufacturers are very transparent about how their ropes are made, and there are many different kinds of rope. Some of them are better for specialty applications than others. This is an integral tool that you're going to use every day, and you should learn as much as you can about the rope and the tools that you use. These ropes come with an inspection and instruction card, and it's important that you read it. But in a nutshell, you should know what the rope looked like when it was new. You should run your hands over every single inch of it so that you're performing a tactile inspection as well as a visual inspection. You should have a clear idea of what constitutes a failing component of this rope. Seeing the internal threads, a certain number of breaks through the outer sheath, or other general wear and degradation like glazing, those are all things that we're going to take a look for. It's important to remember that I don't check my rope periodically or once a day. I check it before I climb every single time. As I approach a tree and I flake my rope out to climb, I make sure that I have a knot at the termination end of the rope. I'm always doing a rope inspection every single day because it's very easy to inadvertently clip a rope with a handsaw or step on it with a spur or something else and not even be aware that you did it. More and more ropes today are utilizing a spliced eye. There are different techniques to create the spliced eye, and it's important that you understand your splice and how it works. A stitched splice is different than a splice that passes back through and squeezes on itself and is held in place by constriction. Once you know what kind of splice you have, you can perform a more detailed inspection of it and make a determination about the integrity of the splice. Most modern rope splicing companies will provide a tag that will list a lot of significant information about the splice, where and when it was done, and that needs to be in place on most contracts that I'm aware of. In terms of textiles, like the type that we use for our hitch climber cord, we want to make sure that these meet all of the same requirements as delineated by the Z133 and by the rope manufacturer in terms of strength and durability and suitability to our purpose. Like Tito said, with the bridge on the saddle, this is a very high wear piece of equipment, and I need to take it apart and inspect it every single time that I climb. As you can see from this piece here, which is in good condition, it's already sort of developed a little bit of memory in terms of how it wraps onto the rope, and while the outside looks almost new, I can see discoloration and I can see abrasion on the inside. And it's important that I take it apart all the way, inspect the whole thing, and I pay careful attention to the splices at either end.
Yeah, and if I might add on that too, on your Proof 6, a good idea is that when you guys are climbing, every so often, flip it to the other side. That way they burn evenly on both sides. Because if you leave it on there, like Craig said, it creates that memory, and when you do try to flip it, it's going to want to tend to go back to its original shape. So it's not a bad idea after a few climbs, switch it over so they could burn evenly and it'll last that much longer, because you're going to go through these way faster. So
yeah, and I'm as prone to anybody at getting a favorite piece of equipment that I really like, but these have a finite lifespan. They are designed to be replaceable. Inspect your equipment, have a good idea of when it's time to retire it, and when it's time, don't hesitate to do so.
yeah.
Moving on into our connectors, we have rope snaps and we have carabiners. All of our rope snaps or rope attachments have to meet a minimum 5,000 pound braking strength. It's important to know that with carabiners, we have the carabiner, we have the gate, and then we have the locking mechanism. All locking mechanisms used in the arborist industry have to be of the double auto locking type. That means that it takes two separate and distinct movements before I open the gate to open the carabiner. Screw gate carabiners are not permitted, and older auto styles that require only one movement before opening the gate are also insufficient and dangerous to use. I want to make sure that I understand that the longest axis on the carabiner is its strongest axis. Across the short section is weaker, and the gate is often the weakest part of the carabiner. When I inspect my carabiners, it's important that I know what all the parts are. That there's a pin that holds the gate in place, that there may be a spring that actuates the gate, and I need to understand how the locking mechanism works. I want to articulate it quickly, and I also want to articulate it slowly to make sure that it always locks in a positive manner. I also want to inspect the carabiner and make sure that there's no cracks, distortion, or that I haven't had rope abrasion that causes a notch to form in the bottom of the carabiner. That carabiner is at the end of its service life as far as a piece of life-saving support equipment. Oftentimes, carabiners are marked with manufacturer's instructions, and they're going to have a weight rating expressed in kilonewtons. Kilonewtons is a measurement of force, not weight. But for most tree climbers, they're simply going to take the number of kilonewtons and multiply that by 220 to reach an approximation to make sure that they're meeting that 5,000 pound weight requirement. Tito, do you have any more to say?
So yeah, with these, remember we work with pines with a lot of gunk. We work through the dirt and all that. So it's very important also to give it your proper maintenance on these carabiners. If you guys notice that they're not locking, sometimes with a little bit of water and mild soap, and brush it out with the brush, and then re-clean everything with the blower or anything like that. If you're going to use WD-40, anything like that to lubricate it, you still want to rinse that WD-40, and then with your blower or anything, take all that residue out, because remember, if you leave that WD-40, it's going to attract dirt and all that. Now it's going to be like sandpaper, and it's going to waste that much faster. So it's very important to know how to do your proper maintenance on there to make sure they last longer. And remember, this is your life support. This is what you're holding up on the tree. So make sure you're taking care of your carabiners or snaps and all your.
We also want to make sure that if we have ropes that are for rigging and ropes that are for climbing, that those are different and that everyone on the crew clearly understands the difference. The same with our hardware. If we have hardware that's for rigging, that is not used for life supporting climbing. And if we have climbing equipment, that is not used for rigging. We also still sometimes see the steel safety snaps. These have to meet the 5,000 pound strength rating, and they also have to be of an auto locking design. It should not be possible for me to press on the gate and open this without using two motions, to press down the safety and then actuate the gate. When I perform my inspection, I want to make sure that any rivets, any springs, any articulation points move the way that they're supposed to, that it's not possible for me to open the gate, and no matter how I manipulate this, quickly or slowly, that it closes in a secure manner. I also want to make sure that this doesn't have any cracking, distortion, or serious abrasion or wear on it.
All right. So good points, Greg. So from here, we're going to end up jumping into our AFCs, our adjustable false crotches, and our friction savers. So on these, what you want to do your inspection on your adjustable false crotches or AFCs, that's what everybody knows them as. You always want to check your rings. So check your rings for any sharp edges, any cracks, anything like that, because your life is up there on the tree when you're going through it. Of course, it's less friction when you use your rings, but you got to make sure you're giving your inspection every day. From there, what you want to do is you want to jump to your stitching. Make sure that stitching, this covering is there for that protection of the stitching. If any threads are coming out, it's better to get rid of it and get a new one. That tag, also from ANSI, make sure that tag's still there. And kind of how Craig talked about with the ropes, run your hands through it. Any burns, any flat spots, that could be a hazard to the heart of the rope. So you want to run your hands through it. So remember, rope is cheap. Considering to a life, rope is cheap. It's better to replace it and not risk your life up there in the canopy of the tree. And so just replace it if it needs to be replaced. Also with the Proof 6, what you want to do is the same thing. Look at the tags, your stitching, your other ring. Make sure run your whole hands through the whole ring. That 10% wears out, it's time to get replaced. Okay. Same thing goes with the friction savers. Again, the stitching. That's what you want to look for. That stitching. Make sure no damages, no cuts, anything through the whole thing. Your rings, 10% wear again. Run your hands through it. No sharp edges because your rope is running through there. Okay, Craig, anything you want to add with the friction savers?
I would just add to remember that if this is a piece of your climbing equipment, it's basically a piece of life support equipment and it should be treated as such. I know a lot of people get to the end of a hard climb and they're tired. It's very tempting to just tie an overhand knot in the end of your rope and just pull the friction saver out of the tree and allow it to fall down and hit the ground. I think that that's a practice that should be discouraged.
Yes. Yeah. All right, good point. Okay, from here we're going to end up jumping to the micro pulleys and the hitch climber pulleys. I'll do the hitch climber pulley since this one has more components. This is practically the same thing. So what you want to look on your hitch climber pulleys, you want to look at those rivets. Make sure those rivets are nice and sealed because they seal them by pressure, and if you see them bulging out or popping out, then something's wrong with it and let's get it replaced. Again, what you want to look here, where your connections are, that 10%. Feel it with your finger. Make sure that 10%, it'll let you know. From there, you want to look at your plates. Make sure all the edges, these whole edges, make sure it's not sharp because your rope is running through there. So if it's sharp edges, now what is it creating to your rope? It's cutting it, and now you're in danger of falling out of the tree or hurting yourself real bad. Those swinging plates, make sure there's not a lot of play in it. Make sure they're nice and snug, not too loose. Also on your wheel, make sure. Also feel your fingers on there. Make sure there's no crack edges or anything like that, or any sharp edges that can cut your rope. Okay, anything you want to add with the hitch climber?
I would just add that as climbing systems become more specialized and more individualized, companies are meeting the needs of climbers by creating pieces of equipment that are specifically designed from the ground up to be used in a specific type of climbing application. If you buy a piece of equipment and you're using it in an application outside of what the manufacturer intended, you may be subjecting that piece of equipment to wear and stress that it was never designed to tolerate.
Yeah, good points. All right, so from here we're going to go to mechanicals. I know there's a lot of mechanicals out on the market. It's the future of the industry. That's the way that the whole industry, residential or line clearance, it's going. It's a great type of equipment, but we got to make sure we're doing our inspections on these. Okay, so the way you want to inspect on these, you want to check your rivets again. Make sure all those rivets are good. Make sure everything looks good. No bolts bulging out. Make sure everything looks good on that. Okay, from there, you want to check your swivel. Make sure there's not a lot of play. Also check for rings. Sometimes those little rings, that means it's wearing out. And if that 10% wears out, you got to watch that too. So make sure you're running your hands through it, visualizing. Again, where your rope runs through, make sure there's no sharp edges. Make sure everything looks good so it's not cutting your rope. From there, we'll go to the chain links. So the chain links, what you want to do is always inspect your chain links. Make sure there's no hairline fractures, anything like that could create a potential hazard for you. Again, the springs, you want to check that spring. Make sure that's lodging up and down. Make sure that spring is working. If that spring is not working, you're going to go for a ride and you can really hurt yourself, or it could be a fatality. So make sure that spring is popping back. Also, the 10% wear inside here, that's where your rope is running through constantly. So if that 10% wears out, it's pretty much time to retire it. Okay, another important thing with these mechanicals, they're not like Proof 6. You can't be side loading them and all that. Ropes could bend in different ways. These chain links, it's not intended for you to be impacting side loading when you're maneuvering through different branches, anything like that. So it's very important to not side load it because they could break. And all of a sudden you're coming down and hurt yourself real bad, or a fatality like we just said. So Craig, anything with the mechanicals?
Just in an ideal world, when you're issued a piece of equipment, you would be issued it brand new in the box, unopened, with the instruction manual with it. That way you know the entire history of that piece of equipment, and you have the information from the manufacturer to understand its weaknesses, its limitations, its lifespan, and its proper inspection procedure. If you're issued a piece of equipment that you do not have the instructions for, all of the major manufacturers have their information and literature online, and a simple search via the internet is going to get you the information that you need. That's it.
That's it. All right, so that's
One other thing I forgot. As you put together systems from different equipment manufacturers, there can be compatibility issues with different types of equipment. Equipment from one manufacturer may not be able to be used with equipment from another manufacturer safely. And in addition, some pieces of equipment are designed to work with very, very specific rope diameters. So anytime you're building a climbing system or any other kind of rigging system, you do want to keep a careful eye out that all of your pieces are compatible with one another.
So remember, it's very important to do your gear inspection on a daily basis.
Our personal safety is our personal responsibility, and safety is our focus every day.